Good morning, Nigeria. Welcome to today's newspaper review. Let's take a look at the stories dominating today's headlines. Firstly, we'll start from the Punch newspaper. On the Punch newspaper in page 2 and 17, it is boldly written, "Bandits launch over 50 attacks in 1 week." This is coming from the police report. They are saying in 1 week, Bandits has launched over 50 attacks. At the top of the newspaper, banks earn 225 billion naira from ATM. Bank has earned 225 billion naira from ATM e-banking charges. To read that story, you go to page 27 of the Punch newspaper. At the bottom of the Punch newspaper on page 8, federal government opens special CBN account for retirees' benefits. The federal government has opened special CBN account for retirees' benefits. Away from that newspaper to the Daily Trust. On the Daily Trust, on day 4 of the renewed Hope Federal Capital Territory, President Tinubu commissions Abuja Court of Appeal building today. At the top of the newspaper, we buried our father without our mother. To read that story, you go to page 6, 5, and 4 of the newspaper. Away from that newspaper to the New Telegraph. On the New Telegraph in page 3, 4, 28, and 29, Black Sunday, Nigerian bleeding. Church can't remain silent, Khan declares. At the top of the newspaper, Q1 26, Nigeria's company income tax dips 8.1% to 1.37 trillion naira. To read that story, you go to page 25 of the newspaper. Still in the New Telegraph newspaper, insecurity, ministers, governors may become targets, Barutai warns. This is coming from Barutai. He says, insecurity, ministers, governments may become targets. To read that story, you go to page 3 of the New Telegraph. Still in the same newspaper, on international news, Trump warns Israel, Iran not to blow it after new strikes threaten ceasefire deal. To read that story, you go to page 2 and 4 of the New Telegraph. At the bottom of the New Telegraph, South Africa deploys drones, BWC to stop 586 Nigerians, orders from sneaking in. Still on xenophobic. To read that story, you go to page 2 of the newspaper. Lastly, at the bottom of the newspaper, Atiku's ADC ticket sparks fears of South vote split realignment. This is on 2027 election. Atiku's ADC ticket sparks fears of Southern vote split realignment. To read that story, you go to page 4 of the New Telegraph. Away from that newspaper to the Matrix. On the Matrix, boldly written on page 2, US-Iran-Israel war, truce at last. To read more on that story, go to page 2 of the newspaper. At the top of the newspaper, IMF reports CPPE backs Tinubu's reforms, warns against crushing interest rates, rising poverty. To read that story, go to page 3 of the newspaper. Still in the same newspaper, 10th Fund approves 7.5 billion naira research grant for 174 projects. This is from 10th Fund. They have approved 7.5 billion naira research grant for 174 projects. To read that story, go to page 2 of the Matrix newspaper. At the bottom of the newspaper, Oshimole opens up on Akpabio's daughter's NNPC limited job. Oshimole opens up on Akpabio's daughter's NNPC limited job. To read more on that story, go to page 2 of the newspaper. Still in the same newspaper, on celebrity, Daddy Freeze apologizes for dress code breach at Alex Ekubo's memorial. To read more on that story, go to page 23 of the newspaper. On sports news, World Cup, Man United's Ahmad seals Ivory Coast victory over Ecuador. To read more on that news on sports, you go to page 25 of the newspaper. Away from that newspaper to the Vanguard. On the Vanguard, still on renewed hope, Federal Capital Territory, President Tinubu commissions Abuja Court of Appeal building today. At the top of the newspaper, on page 11, oil revenue Low production undermines benefits of high crude oil prices. I'll take that again. Oil revenue. Low production undermines benefits of high crude oil prices. To read more on that story, go to page 11 of the Vanguard newspaper. Still in the same newspaper, Civil War. Why Ojukwu returned to recognize Gowon as head of states. This is coming from Abdulzari. He says, Civil War. Why Ojukwu returned to recognize Gowon as head of state. To read more on that story, go to page 8 of the newspaper. Away from that newspaper to the Nigerian Tribune. On the Nigerian Tribune on page 3, which is boldly written, outrage spreads over General Raab's death in Bandits' hand. At the top of it, the newspaper, Oriri adoption, Bauchi governors visits Makinde, canvasses security architecture rejig. This is on adoption of the Oriri and the ones that happen at Bonu. Bauchi governor visits Makinde, Governor Makinde, that's the governor of Oyo State, canvas on insecurity architecture. To read more on that story, you go to page 2 of the Nigerian Tribune. Still in the same newspaper, Christian Association of Nigeria marks Black Sunday, urges action against insecurity. To read more on that story, you go to page 3 of the newspaper. Still in the same newspaper, Day 4 of Renewed Hope Federal Capital Territory. President Tinubu commissions Abuja Court of Appeal building today. Away from that newspaper to the Daily Sun. On the Daily Sun newspaper, on page 26 and 27, insecurity, Christian leaders call federal government out. Still on insecurity, the Christian Leaders Association has called federal government out. At the top of the newspaper, notice of cover price adjustments. Notice of cover price adjustment. Still in the same newspaper, and still talking about the renewed hope of Federal Capital Territory, President Tinubu commissions Abuja Court of Appeal building today. Away from that newspaper to The Guardian. On The Guardian on page 6, concerns over assets. Risks as airport shun comprehensive insurance. Concerns over assets. Risk as airports shun comprehensive insurance. To read more on that story, go to page 6 of the Guardian newspaper. At the top of the Guardian newspaper, 1 year after Yelewata killings in Kebbi, revive calls for security overhaul. 1 year after they killed Yelewata in Kebbi, revive calls for security overhaul. To read more on that story, go to page 6 of the newspaper. Abacha's cycle marked me. 3 generals for elimination, says Abubakar. This is coming from Abubakar saying that Abacha's cycle marked him. 3 generals marked him and 3 generals for elimination. To read more on that story, you go to page 3 of the newspaper. Still on Renewed Hope Federal Capital Territory, President Tinubu commissions Abuja Court of Appeal building today. That's all for today's newspaper review. Thank you for watching and stay tuned for more updates. I'm Chidera Isu. Do have a beautiful day.